Here we go. All right, so greetings, everyone. Thank you for coming to this Meet the Author session. My name is Dr. Marquese McFerguson. I'm an assistant professor within the School of Communication and Multimedia Studies at Florida Atlantic University. Much of my research explores Black masculinity and stereotypes, and a lot of my research also uses the methodology of autoethnography. And so that's I was invited to do this book talk, Meet the Author session with Dr. Stephen Battle, and you are in for a good time tonight. Me and Dr. Battle talked a little bit earlier, and I really feel like we're going to explore some topics that are very important in general, but important in the times that we're in right now. And so I will kind of give you a brief outline of how the session will flow. So I will kind of give a brief introduction of Dr. Battle. He will give a brief overview of his book, and then we will, from that time until 6:40, have a talk back and forth between me and him. And at 6:40, we will open up the discussion to a Q&A with the audience. And so you can type your questions in the chat, or we will call on you if you use the raise your hand symbol or icon in Zoom. So without further ado, I will begin with a brief introduction of Dr. Battle. All right, so Dr. Stephen Battle is a professor of social work at Rhode Island College.
Can I correct you just for a minute? It's
yes.
Stefan. It's Stefan.
Stefan, because I've always called you Dr. Battle, so I've never really said your first name.
No worries, no worries.
Yeah, Stefan Battle is a professor of social work at Rhode Island College School of Social Work MSW program in Providence, Rhode Island. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology and a Master's of Social Work, both from Boston University. His doctorate in education is from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Stefan has 9 publications, including book chapters and the monograph we will discuss tonight. His scholarship focuses on autoethnography and performative ethnography, addressing Black males' racial trauma in the United States. Stefan was a fellow in 2021 at the Kennedy Center Playwright Intensive. As a playwright, he combines the arts and humanities to create plays addressing the social injustices of race and racism. Stefan's book, A Performative Autoethnography of 5 Black American Men, which we'll be discussing tonight, was published in 2023 by the Rutledge, Taylor, and Francis Group within the Writing Live series. The book features his debut stage reading, Wishes by Black Men. So to all our guests who are here, I introduce none other than Stefan Battle. So yes, indeed. And so once again, I am a big stickler on names because I'm often called Marquese, Marquese. And so I apologize. Like I said, I've just been calling you Dr. Battle. And so I apologize about that. I'm really big on that. So thank you for correcting me.
No worries, no worries.
And so, like I said earlier, we will begin with Dr. Battle will begin with a brief overview of his text for those who maybe have not had an opportunity to read it. And then we'll dive right into the discussion between me and him. So, Dr. Battle.
First, I want to give a big shout out to Art. I didn't expect him to be here, but I want to say hi to Art. Art was a huge mentor to me and a support through this book. So, and with Carolyn, his wife. So I just want to big shout out to Art. It's nice to see you, Art.
Nice to see you too. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
I'm looking forward to this program.
Thank you, Art. Well, you know much about the book, so thank you. So I'm going to just read a passage that that kind of talks about the book, and I'm sorry. The book for me was really about talking about Black men. And as Marquese and I talked about earlier in the day, it was about what unfortunately people have been taught, mistaught, to be honest, about Black men through either growing up in terms of their family, the communities they participate in, societal, anything. And what I wanted to do with this book was to tell the story of Black men through the authenticity of their own words. Many times, researchers some researchers that I have read will do studies on people of color, gather data, and then do their interpretations of that findings. I didn't want to do that. I wanted these guys' exact words and to use their words in terms of a publication. Originally, when I have first gathered this data, so let me just finish saying this, I'm sorry. So in terms of what I wanted people to know was, I wanted people to put away what they were told or thought or heard about Black men and walk into this book and the play with coming out with it saying, I didn't know that. I've heard it differently now. Now I understand better. Versus before, like, oh, I know that already. This is old news to me. Why are we talking about this again? That was the premise of the book. And I think for some people who have read the book, and I definitely know this because unfortunately, the play has had 2 productions so far. And I'm very humbled and blessed by that because any of you who are in the arts know that people who are playwriters or whatever, musicians, their work sometimes doesn't get produced for a while, or maybe not at all. And I've been fortunate and blessed that my production, my play has been produced twice. And from knowing that, I've had people come up to me just with the premise that I wanted and say, I did not know. And in some respects, almost to the level of not absolutely saying it, but to the close to saying, I'm sorry, which is okay. But I'd rather you just take the information, absorb the information, and take it someplace where you can pass it on to other people. But more importantly, you use it for your own self and erase, if you have those beliefs, erase the other beliefs that you had before. So it was a labor of love. The characters, I had worked with them for about 5 or 7 years, and it was kind of sad to let them go. If any of you are a parent here, you kind of like let your children go. And it was
Yes.
kind of sad to let them go, but it was going to let them go into out there in the universe somewhere and do good. Because again, these 4 guys, excuse me, trusted me with their words, trusted me with their emotions, and trusted me with their stories to be able to create what I've created in terms of not only this book, but the play as well.
Got you. And I think that that provides a perfect segue to the first question I wanted to ask you, because oftentimes I remember my advisor told me what we write about is important, but how we write about those things is equally important, right? And so I think when we talk about autoethnography, oftentimes we talk about content, but I think we don't talk about craft enough, in particular the artistic choices that we make as we're writing autoethnographies. And so my first question to you is, um, can you explain to the audience the significant artistic choices / creative choices you made throughout the book, in particular when it comes to how you formatted and structured the book? So I think the stage reading in chapter 2 comes to mind, and just kind of like the specific artistic choices that you made within that chapter, right?
So instead of, as I said earlier, instead of gathering the data by interviews or whatever and then interpret them, I again wanted the guys' actual stories. So I wrote three writing prompts for the guys. Those 3 questions that the guys had to answer. No, sorry, not had to answer. And they dealt with issues around oppression, powerlessness, and picking your own battles. And I said to the guys in the IRB consent form that if they didn't have a story, they could pass over it and move on. All 4 of them had stories about all 4 of those areas. And all 4 of those areas became the scenes for the play. So I created the writing prompts. I gathered the writing prompts, I analyzed the writing prompts, and I went through themes, commonalities in terms of what the guys were saying in terms of those 3 headings of oppression, powerlessness, and picking your own battles. I then crafted that into a performative play. And I learned that, giving another shout out to Art and Carolyn at a conference that they were at in North Carolina, which was a qualitative conference. And so my discovery was like, this is what I want to do with these guys, because I had already collected the data prior going to that conference. And then when I got that more enthusiastic information from Art and Carolyn in terms of a couple of workshops I had gone to, I was like, this is it. And also, more importantly, why this was it, because I was a voice major many, many years ago. And so the arts has been such a great love for me and a great passion for me. And I left it because it was too mechanical in terms of studying about it. It wasn't the natural flow. I grew up in the church and I sung all the time with my mother, my aunt, my brothers. But then going to school to learn, it was like it just lost the natural flow for me. So I said, this is not for me anymore. So I went and changed over psychology, but going a different direction in my academics, the love of arts was always there. My husband and I, we go to plays, we just fulfill ourselves with the arts. So when I got this information, I learned this information from Art and Carolyn, I said, this is it. This is what I'm gonna do these guys. So I went back home, I flew back home, I was so excited, and I took their data and I crafted it into a script. And I read different pieces of scripts. I looked at a lot of artists and their scripts, and on my self-learning, I wrote and developed how to write a script. Having no idea what I was doing, but feeling with the trust of God that I will do a good job with this. And the other part of this was in terms of, so let me just back up. So there was 4 methods I used. I used evocative, autoethnography, alternative ethnograph, co-constructive narrative, and layered accounts. So I've pretty much told you about a little bit about the evocative. I mean, this guy's stories were very, very raw. I mean, they were very trusting of me in terms of their stories. They held nothing back. And I also, in my IRB asked them not to change anything. Do not change anything of the text. The only thing they're allowed to change was maybe spelling and maybe punctuation, but don't go back and rewrite something. And they stuck to that. And so I had this richness of their stories, if you ever get to read the book, of who they were and how racial trauma impacted them. The alternative ethnography was what I said before. I used to be a voice major. I flipped that artistry from being a voice major to now being a playwright, having that background of being an artist and enjoying that. So I said, let's do a script. The co-constructed narrative was I took their voices and wrote it into co-constructed. So it was dialogue that you could hear them talking to each other. So I tried my best, because as a singer, excuse me, as a singer, you want to move into the next note with grace and ease. You don't want to go choppy, choppy, choppy. So with my writing with their voices, I tried to move into a conversation, a dialogue. And I think I've achieved that well. The layered account was the piece that I really enjoyed the most was, so you had the guy's stories, and then off on the side, and maybe some of you all experienced this before, I have in few plays, you have the stories of the guys going, but then off on the side, you have this person interpreting what the actors were saying. And that's me, the storyteller. So if you read the play, you'll see their dialogue. And then off on the side, you'll see this little voice called the storyteller. And that's me. And what I'm doing is I'm feeding back to the audience what the guys are saying, but I'm also at the same time telling you about my story along with theirs. So I'm not part of the play in that respect of their 4 characters, but I'm off on the side doing this piece with my voice so you can hear how affirming I am being with their story and acknowledging their story as another person, not only the playwright, but a Black man joining with them. So it was, I'm going to say, very creative in some respects. And it was very fun to put it together. Again, never had that experience of writing a play, but trusted that I knew I was doing, and helping, and people got help from people like Art, who were very supportive and like saying, you're pretty much on the right, you're on the right track. So, and it was creative. That was the piece I really wanted to be. I wanted it to be creative and still maintain their voices. And I think I did that. The stage reading, I wanted to be a stage reading where I wanted people to see their expressions, their body language, instead of them moving in a play action or a scene action. I wanted you to see them. I wanted you to see their facial expressions. I wanted you to hear their voices. So as they are not, they're kind of lined up and they're in this fictional, supposedly cafe having coffee every Wednesday morning where they get together as friends. I wanted you to see them facially, how they're expressing themselves in terms of the stories they were telling. That's why I chose a stage reading versus a more traditional play.
That's awesome. I think one of the things that stuck out to me, what you mentioned, the layered accounts, which shout out to Dr. Bachner. I learned about that in his class and Carol's class. This idea of, I love the way we talked about earlier, how it feels like you were weaving together or almost braiding together these different narratives, but also your story was intertwined. We talked about this idea of braiding or double dutch, but it seamlessly flowing together. That was very beautiful. And so, since we talked about this performative stage reading, let's kind of stick on that performance train. So this is a question that we kind of explored earlier. So there's a quote in your book that I absolutely love, and it says, like we would check a coat at a restaurant before sitting down to have a meal, we check our very selves at the door, crossing the threshold in a mask to counteract our true selves. And you referenced Paul Laurence Dunbar, which once again I'm a fan of his work. Share the same birthday, and so it introduces this conversation of unmasking. And oftentimes, how do Black men enter these professional spaces, these academic spaces, and Black people more generally? And so my question to you is, do you believe Black people in general, Black men on a regular basis, get a chance to show up as fully themselves in academic sites, professional spaces? And then if yes, why? And if not, what is the impact of this constant masking?
So I'm going to be frank in terms of talking about myself. And I'm going to say, in terms of academic settings, no, unless they find another Black man or a group of Black men. And I'm going to use myself. I had a colleague and a friend when I first got my position at Rhode College as a junior faculty. And he was a junior faculty at Harvard. And we both were Black men. He was in the public school, public health, and I was a school of social work. He and I made a pact with each other that every Friday we would get together and we would have coffee in a cafe in downtown Providence. And we would just talk about our experiences as being Black men in prominent white institutions. That was the only outlet I had. That was the only outlet I had for 5 years as a junior faculty, was his contact. And let me be very clear with all of you. It was such a relief. I couldn't wait till those Fridays to meet up with him. Sometimes we were usually supposed to schedule him for an hour. We'd be in there for 3-4 hours.
Yeah.
And we'd be talking about our experiences, the load that we carry in terms of wearing that mask, walking into white spaces that are sometimes untraditionally for Black men or Black people in general.
Yeah.
And how we have to present ourselves in a way that is poised and assertive and confident to not fulfill the stereotype or perpetuation of what people may think of us as Black men. That's a heavy load to wear from morning to night.
Yeah. From
Monday through Friday. Where the only time you get off is weekends and holidays, if you're lucky. But it's a heavy load to wear. And he and I would talk about that heavy load. And not only that alone, now on being on tenure track in predominantly white institutions, and And I was brought up to believe always from my sister, my mother, my brothers, my older siblings, the elders in the church, you always have to be one step better.
Yeah.
So I've got I got a few triangles going in my life. I've got to be one step better. I'm in a white space and I'm on tenure track.
Yeah.
So back to your question in terms of you gotta check that code, because you know you're walking into a space where others are judging you. And then you pick your coat up when you're done and you can go home and say, oh, another day. I think I can check this box. It was a good day. I think I did what I was supposed to do. I think I honored those before who taught me to be this Black man. It's exhausting. As I told Marquese earlier, it's exhausting. But how society has framed us, labeled us, treated us, it's and I may be a little bit cynical here. It's in some respects necessary.
Yeah, it almost can become sometimes a defense mechanism. But even within operating within this respectability politics, you aren't often it doesn't often work. Sometimes it doesn't work in your favor anyway, right? So this idea of this defense mechanism you're trying to use, you still find that it isn't useful. I shared with you earlier, there will be some times where I'll be sitting in class and, sometimes you are the only person that looks like you in that class, especially the higher up you go. And there will be moments where a question will be asked by a professor, and I'm thinking about what my response will be, but then also how my response will be read from my classmates by me. And by the time I come up with the response that I want to say, we're on to a whole nother part of the conversation, because it's taking me 10 minutes to think about what I want to say, but then also how other people will filter that response, and not wanting to come off as angry or not wanting to perpetuate, like you say, these stereotypes. And then
you literally are sitting there where, like in your case, you're literally sitting there, Marquese, probably you were, or in one space, and you are still in the moment, but you are trying to figure out, how am I going to say this? How is it going to appear what I'm going to say?
Yeah.
And is it going to come off in a way that is in the spirit of what they want to hear, or how they want to hear me?
Yes.
It's all those dynamics that you're going through. And you're right. The question was like 5 minutes ago, and you're still trying to put that together.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, like you said, even from the way that you dress, because I think oftentimes academia also too has a lot of middle class sensibilities, right? And I think depending on walking into that space, me, for instance, I'm a 6'4" dark skinned Black man who has dreadlocks. I am very cognizant of how I am read. I remember vividly one night, I'm a night owl, so I remember coming to the graduate lab to work on my dissertation late and being stopped by the police and having to convince them that I belonged in this space, even though I had a key to the building. It just looked suspicious. I was all suspicious, and so once again, maybe thinking in my head in that time, maybe I could have dressed a little bit more professionally that night, so they would have saw me. But then thinking, like, why would I even have to do this thing?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Because it is a constant performance, right? And so
why should you be the victim to his perceptions?
Yes, indeed. So thank you. This racial trauma connects to another question I want to ask you. So one of my favorite parts of chapter 2 is the discussion that you have. So for those who haven't read the text, it's the stage reading where the 4 characters are in the cafe and they're talking, and the characters are talking about racial trauma, and they're talking about what it means to carry that racial trauma around. And what I love is you began to discuss how this is not just a thing out in the world, but how it resurrects itself in our bodies, in particular, how it impacts our mental and physical health. So it's just not this, oh, they're just talking about that, get over it. No, like this thing becomes a part of how you move throughout the world. And the conversation leads to amongst the characters talking about how they're attempting to combat racial trauma by taking care of themselves through changing their diet, exercising, doing yoga. And so for me, I want to ask you, why was it important for you to include this discussion about Black men taking care of themselves, and the ways in which we not only talk about racial trauma, but also how we deal with this racial trauma that we carry around with us.
Because historically, and Marquise, you could probably speak a little bit too, but this, well, along with me, Black men historically don't take care of themselves.
Yeah.
And you and I shared a couple of stories about our fathers earlier today.
Yeah.
Black men traditionally do not take care of themselves. They don't even go to a doctor. And so therefore their health is always an issue. And so if you're just going through the natural health progression of age, and health issues happen. But then you also have on top of that, this racial trauma that you are dealing with every single day. So it's compounding each other. And you have no outlet to like release whatever you're feeling from this continuous trauma that you experience all the time. So there needs to be some sort of let out. I mean, case in point, I shared with you the story about my friend and I. We get together for coffee. These four guys, I pretended that they had known each other for years. So they were childhood friends. So they got together every Wednesday and had coffee. And that is an outlet of kind of taking care of yourself, because you're not holding it in. You're expressing with people that you can talk to. You have this comfort level of what people that you know, and you can say what you need to say to let go of some of that pain.
Yeah.
You need to let go of some of that pain. Now, there's other mechanisms you do. You can take a walk, you can do yoga, but it's also really important when you connect with other people and hear their story, say, yep, that just happened to me this week.
Yeah.
And let me tell you how it felt for me. And then so and so. It lets go of all that stress. And for people of color, high blood pressure is a huge factor for us.
Yeah.
Huge factor for us. So if you can let go of the steam, if I like to say, it is so beneficial in terms of yoga, walking, how you eat, how you watch what you eat. But more of that, just connecting with other people like you, is so beneficial. And so many people are hungry for that, because there's, in white spaces, you are sometimes the only one, and you're holding it so tight just to wear that mask that sometimes it just gets too hard.
Yeah.
And that plays on your health.
Yeah, no. Yes. Before I comment on that, thank you, Dr. Omni, and also Dr. Bachner, for the comments that you made in the comment section. I think for me, you're talking about this idea of racial trauma and how, once again, it impacts us. So navigating the racial trauma, but then there's also this idea of I have to be twice as good in this space. I learned very early, because I was told you always have to be twice as good. I've learned how to persevere. I've learned how to push myself. I've learned how to push through things. However, I think in a recent article I wrote, I learned how to not break when I'm experiencing all of this, but I never was taught what to do when I'm broken.
Right.
When I can't, because I was taught so much to keep persevering, keep excelling, keep making sure you're achieving these goals. But then when you get to a point where you have no more, what do you do at that space, right? And I agree with you. Sometimes the focus becomes so much on persevering that you forget to take care of yourself. I realized, especially for many people coming from working class backgrounds, this idea of self-care was never discussed in my family. Like, what self? No, you work. You work, you continue to work. You work. Right. And so this idea of, once again, how class comes into this conversation. And so I love the fact that you were talking about what do we do to navigate those things. I remember my advisor, when I got into the PhD program, one of her things was, she said, it may be good for you to, just in general, a therapist may be good, right? And so now you have this conversation of mental health when it comes to, especially working class or people of color in our communities. And this idea, if I would have told my parents I was going to a therapist, they'd be like, what? What, you telling somebody all your business? Like, you don't do that.
People call it, I can speak for Black folks, they don't do that. My mother was very clear with me. What happens in this house stays in the house. You don't bring it outside. It doesn't go outside.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You're right. But you going what you said about therapy. I was in therapy for 8 years.
Yeah.
And I was very proud of those 8 years. And I did take that was self-care for me.
Exactly.
Because I was dealing with a lot of racial trauma from way back that had gotten to the point where I needed some cleansing.
Yes.
I needed some healing.
No, so
And I needed someone to help me through navigating wherever I was at in that point in my life to continue to move on. It was great that my parents, would say, you got to work harder and be one step. I got that. It was
yeah,
wonderful when my mother said, and I wrote in the book, remember you're Black first.
yeah.
Because basically what she was saying to me that you're Black and nobody else in this house, nobody out there is going to treat you like the people in the house that you grow up with. So remember you're Black first because you are different from other people. Those were great messages, but like you just said, they were messages that I held on to, but when it was too much, where am I going with it?
Yeah,
And sometimes, like I said earlier, connecting with somebody was wonderful, but sometimes that even wasn't enough.
yeah. No,
Sometimes that even wasn't enough.
no, seriously. And I think yeah, very important conversation to have about how do we make sure we're taking care of ourselves in this space, because I feel like the graduate school or getting a PhD in academia can be so daunting at times. And so this next question I want to ask, because we do have a diverse audience here, and something that you do in chapter, let me see, what is this? Chapter 3, and I think you do a beautiful job of this, is there's an audience discussion in chapter 3. And I wanted you to talk about a little bit about the challenges holding space for people from different races to discuss racial trauma. Because for those who haven't had an opportunity to read the text, there's a person in this discussion named Matt. And so he's a white man, and he's explaining how he navigates spaces, in particular being a white man, and he's talking about the ways in which oftentimes it's been uncomfortable for him in spaces. And so he's comparing his experiences to that of other Black people and how they navigate professional spaces, and saying basically we have commonalities. And and the way sometimes the audience members, I would say they didn't see eye to eye on some things. And I think the way that Dr. Battle navigates this and creates a productive space for have these conversations was beautiful. And so if you could just speak to a little bit about this idea of the challenges of holding space for people from different races to talk about racial trauma and experiences across those color
So
lines.
this chapter was it was comfortable for me to navigate it and to write it because with the social work background, I have done a lot of group work.
Okay.
And if you all know about group work, if you're in mental health field or been part of groups can be very difficult because, and I mean this in the sense of the facilitator or facilitators are navigating different people's voices. And one of the things in groups that you always want to make sure is everyone has the opportunity to speak. And everyone's conversation is heard from other people. No one's interrupted. No one's information is wrong, and no one's information is off the mark unless it's, unfortunately something horrific that you're saying.
Agreed.
So to navigate these voices of these of the three people, and it was Matt, Sydney, and Antoinette, I allowed them to speak and be transparent. And by allowing them to speak and transparent, in my own writing, I just sat back and let them speak. And they navigated the conversation among themselves with me just being the facilitator. So you will see me interject conversations in there, but not to the point of interrupting their flow of what they're saying. And Antoinette and Sydney were really, in that moment, educating Matt.
Yeah.
And I think Matt, in some ways, because Matt was a white man, he was absorbing it, but he was also still sticking with his privilege.
Yeah.
And his power.
Yeah.
And I think after that conversation, as I was visualizing it, I could feel that Matt was kind of, as I said earlier, how I wanted people to put away what they were known or taught. I think Matt was now feeling like, okay, I'm hearing different messages. I'm learning something new. And I think he went away from that with processing that wherever in his life. But they were the real artists here, Sydney and Antoinette. They were really the artists here because they were educating, and Sydney is a white woman and Antoinette's a black woman. So together they were, I won't say feeding him, but guiding him.
Yeah.
away from his privilege as much as possible, but very gently.
Yeah.
So their voices were, I just like, go for it. just
Yeah.
go for it.
No, you navigated the conversation with so much grace, and I think for
Thank you.
me, it was a moment where once again, because people are coming to this conversation with their frustrations, their feelings, and I think for some people, this is like, okay, this thing you're talking about out in the world, this is something I live with every day. So this is not some abstract notion or theory. Like this is very much embodied. And I think one of the things that's stuck out was also the way in which you would challenge people, or as Dr. Aisha Durham would say, I want to invite you to think about that in a different way. And so there was a moment in the conversation where one of the audience members kept saying, well, these educated Black men. And it was like, and so now we begin to think about the ways in which we frame people and this idea of the educated Black men that were part of the stage reading, and how do their position of being educated impact how you see them, and also how you think they navigate the world. It was once again, you navigated it with so much grace, because I feel like a lot of times when you're having conversations about race across color lines, often you have people who aren't really going to say anything, or they feel intimidated, don't want to say anything, and then when they do say something that people may not agree with, how do we address that? How do we invite them to think about something differently without also to making them shut down so that they don't want to engage anymore, right? And that can be
Exactly.
very challenging. Very
Exactly.
challenging.
And so it's very challenging. So when you just made that example of when someone says, those educated Black men. So my response would have been, and probably was in the book,
Yeah.
say more about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so to get them to be more expressive with that, say more about that.
Yeah.
What is your meaning about that?
Mm-hmm.
So I invite them to say it. And because I want them to hear how they're putting that out there.
Yeah.
And I want others to hear how that's putting out there, that maybe they can help them say it differently or understand it better.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think also too, it allows for the people not to assume what your meaning was, right? This idea of like, could you please expound upon that? And so thank you once again for the comment in the chat. Art, I appreciate that. I want to so this is my final question I have before we open it up to the audience. And so this is probably, when I talk to authors about their book, this is probably my favorite question to ask any author. And the question is, what did you learn about yourself through writing this book?
I had such great healing. That's the word I can use. I had such great healing when I was writing this book. And I had such great empathy for myself and for the other 4 Black men, because even though our story, and that's the thing I want to say to people. Even though you may think you hear the stories and they may sound similar, and I'm using Marcus if he doesn't mind right now. Marcus and I can still both have Marquese and I can both still have the same story, but Marquese's story is going to be different from my story because it's Marquese's story. And my story is my story. So we can have in the same day, we can have the same incident happen. But Marquese is going to have a different twist to it because it was his story. And I'm going to have a different twist to it because it was my story.
Yeah.
As I said in my book, no 2 snowflakes are alike. And that's what I want people to understand. That every Black man you run into, you encounter, you experience, we are not the same.
Yeah.
We are not the same. And so you hear that if you ever read the book or you get to see the play, you'll hear there's commonality among the 4 guys, but there is definitely differences in how they present the story and their emotions to the story and their passion to the story and their way they articulate the story is different because it is their story. That is so important to me. So I feel I got that through in writing this book, but the more important thing, back to your question, is it was so healing
Yeah.
in writing it by doing what I just said and the creative. I just, as I said earlier, it was sad to see it be launched and had let it go, but it was time to let it go. It was
Yeah.
time to let it go. But it was such a healing moment for me. It was such a healing moment for me.
No, that's beautiful. And yeah, so at this point in time, I will open the floor up, or open the discussion group up to questions from the audience. So either you can use the raise your hand symbol, and I can call on you, or I can call from the chat. Okay. All right. So we have our first question in the chat, and then once again, if you have more questions, we'll go. So greetings, my brothers, kings. As a Black woman with a PhD working in the PWI space, I needed this. This was my Friday coffee date. Thank you so much for this love download. Please keep doing the work and amplifying the voices of Black people. Ashe. No, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you for that comment. I realize sometimes, kind of like Dr. Battle said earlier, sometimes you are the lonely only, sometimes in your department. And so sometimes you have to get there a little virtually, if you can't get it, And so, yeah, thank you for your comment. That is much appreciated. Um, other people, does anyone else have questions that they would like to chime in? Okay, so Dr. Berg, the floor is yours.
Hi, wonderful conversation. And I'm looking at this, and I haven't read the book, I apologize. I was looking at the description here, and it says it includes an interview with a white woman regarding her relationship to race and racism. And I wonder about that. I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, because I've said to people, when I'm in the United States, I feel more raced than anywhere else when I travel, when I teach abroad. It's like this context of like getting, I know I'm white when I'm in America, where everywhere else I'm just a person. And so I would be interested in knowing what this mention here, this line here of a white woman and her read on race and racism.
So sorry, Dr. Berg, let me make sure I tell you right. So it's chapter 1, and she opens the book. And so it's an autoethnographic interview with Beth Hewitt. And Beth is a friend of mine. And Beth is also a writer too. And I would, share things part with the story book with her. And Beth and I have had our moments in a healthy way in terms of me educating her and she educating me in terms of her white privilege and me as a Black man. And so when I did this interview with her, she was very open to it. She was very open to it. One of the things she was concerned about was she didn't tell her family, and she didn't tell any friends except for a few, and definitely her husband, that she was doing this interview. And because what she was afraid of, how they were going to see her afterwards in sharing very, and I do mean very intimate stories about her family. She tells a very story, and it's out there, it's in the book, of a family member who was part of the Klan. And it was, she was very, she was a hero to herself. I'm just going to put it that way. She was a hero to herself. And she was very free about talking about it with me. She was very open about talking about it. She was very, she left nothing out. And I even said to her, I even said to her, Beth, do you want to write this? Do you want this in? She said, yes, I do. I do. When the book was getting ready to be published, she kind of pulled back. She said, I'm so worried how my family. And so we talked about it. We talked about it, and she came to the conclusion, I need to do this. I needed to be out there. So it was a wonderful experience. And I've known Beth for over 10 years, but she's never been this transparent with me. never been as transparent with me. And so it was a very powerful moment for me. It was much more powerful for her because she was not only removing layers of herself, she was literally, figuratively, not figuratively, but she was undressing in front of me. And she was sharing stories that she was very ashamed about, but she felt like she wanted to be part of this book and to contribute of the book because she knew what it was going to mean for people to hear her story, as I told you about my story. She thought it was equally as important, and so that we shared together with this book. But it was a powerful interview. It was a powerful interview.
I definitely will echo that. I think one of the things that stuck out to me in the interview was this idea of the way Beth navigated race or chose to or not to interact with people of color and Black people throughout her life. Even sharing the incident where she got coworker got promoted and and how that turned out. The coworker who got promoted was a Black woman, and how she attempted to navigate that space. And yeah, it was very honest, very
She's very
honest.
honest. She's very
Yeah,
honest.
and so that was beautiful. But I think, like you said, based upon who she is and how she's positioned in the world, I think that was a very important part of the book. So yes, also want to highlight the comment by Dr. Berry saying that the journal Autoethnography wants to review reviews of Dr. Battle's book. They will take multiple reviews. If folks get the book and write a review, send it in 1,000 to 1,500 words. We'll work with this. All right.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. Are there other questions from the audience? Okay, Dr. Berry.
Yeah, I love this conversation, and I can't wait to dig deeper into the book, and I'm grateful. You're talking about always need to be a step ahead. In my own version, clearly I live with advantage in light of my whiteness, but I live also as a gay male, And there's that book from the 80s, The Best Little Boy in the World, right? You always have to be the best, right? It covers the stigma. It helps soothe the stigma. So that's it. I appreciate that. It resonated. I was present in that. Any type of book can be done with any number of choices in terms of standpoints, right? So I heard you folks mentioning clearly race and gender and class. Was sexuality in the mix in these performances?
No, but in the book, I talk about my sexuality.
Cool.
Not with the characters. I talk about my sexuality. I actually talk about in chapter. You think I would know this by now? Sorry.
Chapter 4. It was chapter 4. I know about heart. Yeah.
In chapter 4, I talk about coming out to my brother.
Cool.
And how that felt by coming out to my brother. And it was, just give you a little context. My brothers are 12 years older than me. Football guys, very Afrocentric guys, straight males. I'm the youngest of 4. And so coming out to him was like terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely terrifying. Not only because it was just coming out, but they were my mentors. They had a huge presence in my life. And they're Afrocentric, and they're straight men. And there's this male, this masculinity about them. And you're coming out to this profile of a person. What are they going to do to you? Are you going to be shunned? Are you going to be accepted? Or whatever. I'm kind of skipping very quickly. He was the Black father that I needed at that time. He was awesome. He was absolutely awesome. He was literally awesome. If there's anything to give credit to with him, that way I always give him credit for that. He was the Black father I needed at that time. He was tentative. He asked a lot of questions. And as you probably know, young gay men, doesn't matter what color, get shunned, dismissed from the family. None of that.
Yeah. Cheers to tentativeness being
Yes.
a positive value and affirming value, right?
Yes, absolutely.
It's gorgeous. Thank
Absolutely.
you. Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. You're welcome.
And so it is approaching 6:50. So we have, say, time for one more question. If there's anybody who has something that they wanted to say or ask before we close out, because I want to make sure I honor the time. All right, Art, is it are you? I think you muted Art.
Sorry for that. Just wanted to point out that there are no sessions scheduled after this one. So if you do go over a few minutes, that's not a problem. Though I know the exhaustion is probably setting in for some folks.
No problem. Thank you for sharing that. We have one more question from another question for Dr. Bird. Go ahead. Oh, and it's Dr. Bird. Before you chime in, I know you mentioned you say when you were in the United States. Could you say where you're I guess primarily stationed or live?
Yeah, no, I'm in the United States now. And
Okay.
I did a presentation earlier about winning a grant to teach about texts that all they had to do was be based about African content, and how my students had a certain response, but the response from my immediate department was even more detrimental, put it that way.
Gotcha.
So, live and learn.
Yeah.
One thing you all were using this expression of like educated Black men or intelligent Black men, right? And so I had this student last year, no, it must have been before that, and he was wanting to do a project, and I was interested in it, and he was setting up this Juneteenth celebration for our campus.
Okay.
And I didn't even know that we had never had a Juneteenth celebration on our campus. That, because I came out of Kansas, and in Lawrence, Kansas, they're huge. I mean, they're these huge celebrations they had for years and years and years. And so I'm out in Colorado now. And so I said, his history, when we got to know each other, we're talking, and his family history is so full of, violence and drug use. And to see him moving into the PhD level, I was in awe. Like, he'd tell me these stories about an uncle who regularly beat him. And and he joined the military. And oftentimes, for some people, that's the way out, I'm like, okay, so you have to sign away your life to this violent organization to remove yourself from a violent situation. And then he was using the GI Bill, coming back and getting his degrees. And I was just blown away and he had very interesting stories about trying to navigate that sense of not doing enough. Like, you both had this expression of, like, your parents say, you always have to do a little bit more, a little bit more. So you had this messaging through your childhood for this. He didn't have that, right? And so we often had these conversations about how he should deal with conflicts that sometimes came up, right? So my question would be, in addition to this, like some of these simple messages, like, you got to be, a step ahead, you got to be a little bit better. What are some of the other messages that you think really allowed you to be successful to the level you are?
One message for me was, as I said earlier, was my mother would say to me, not a lot, but on occasions, remember you're Black first. And she never said anything other than that. That was her phrase. Remember you're Black first. And, you can interpret that in many ways. You're Black first. Okay, so I'm Black. That means, but no. Her interpretation was, and my parents were from the South, and they were part of the Jim Crow era. You're Black first, which means that people are going to look at you differently no matter what, which means that you must carry yourself in a way that they don't perpetuate the stereotype of who you are. So that's one message I got. Another message I got was I had, like I said, I had older siblings, so they had been through a lot themselves, and so they would tell me things. Another message I got, I grew up in the church. My church was predominantly Black. I had a lot of the elderly, the elders, not the elderly, the elders, who told you a lot of stories, who literally at sometimes figuratively or literally would walk you by the hand to say, not this way, this way. And that you're going to do, not that you will, not that maybe you should do, no, you're going to do. I say to people now, my contribute to this book and all the things my successes comes from my family and the people in the church that raised me. There would be no stuff on battle. Yes, there would be stuff on battle, but there would be no stuff on battle if I didn't have those messages, those people in my family, and definitely the people in the church. You see the product of me right now because of them. As a Black man, as an older Black man now, but as a Black man, you see the product of them. So I got messages, I got images, I got role. I mean, it was a very holistic grouping. It was not just one, it was several different things.
Yeah, I'll echo Dr. Battle's sentiments. I think for me, it was both my parents, very much like Dr. Battle, come from the Jim Crow South. My parents grew up in the Delta. My father's from Mississippi. My mother's from Arkansas. My grandparents were sharecroppers. And so both my parents, both my parents, instead of having an opportunity to go to middle school and high school, my grandfather thought it would be more economically beneficial for the family for them to pick cotton instead of going to school. And so both my parents literally picked cotton. And so for them, it became a situation where when they were adults, even though neither one of them had more than a middle school education, they impressed upon me the importance of education. One, because they didn't get it, have an opportunity to get it. And two, they realized the key that it could be for opening doors for me. And, I think now they didn't know everything that would come along with me having to navigate these spaces, but my parents also knew about navigating white spaces. And it was very much understanding that to be considered half as good, you have to be twice as good. And so that perseverance, that part of me was very important because most people when you enter academia, you navigate imposter syndrome anyway. Right. But I think when you're one of the few people that look like you, it is heightened. And so I always had a model of there will be graduate students that will be smarter than me, but there will be not a graduate student that will outwork me. Now, as I grew, I had to learn how to balance that with self-care, but my goal was you will not outwork me. And I stand with Dr. Battle in saying that I often feel like I am very much a product of a neighborhood and environment, which would most people went to my neighborhood today, they will probably be nervous and afraid. I'm just going to be honest from where I come from. And it's a situation where I wholeheartedly acknowledge that everything from that neighborhood made me who I am. And I don't shy away from it. I'm not ashamed of it because all those people, many people who didn't have a chance to get college degrees made me who I am. And I am very proud of that, even though I come from very, very humble beginnings.
Right. I mean, I just echo one more time, Marcus. So my parents, unfortunately, did not go to school. I mean, they got, my father didn't even go. He started, and then he got taken out to work for the family. My mother did finish high school, but my mother was very clear that her children were going to get what she and her husband, my father, did not get, which was an education. And, not to boast, but my siblings and I, we all have college degrees, and all of us have master's degrees, and 3 of us have doctorates.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I remember that in the book, and I think there's a quote of one of my favorite rap lyrics where the rapper says, "Everything I'm not, maybe everything I am." Right? This idea of sometimes we focus on the stuff that we don't get, but the stuff that we did get made us who we are. So thank you. And I saw Art, I saw your hand.
Yeah, can I add just one thing here toward the end? I met Dr. Battle a good 3 years before this book was published, in a writing workshop at a meeting in North Carolina, and he came up to me during the workshop and said he had an idea for this book, and he wanted my opinion of it, and I encouraged him to write to me with his ideas, and we started a conversation that lasted really throughout the 3 years.
It's very true.
With phone calls, with emails. He was never present on my campus or near me. But I really appreciate the comment Marquese just made about work, because this book was a lot of work. It was a lot of work, and there was a lot of learning on my part as well. I learned a lot of so much. And the various artistic moves, aesthetic moves in the book, some of which were discussed during this session, were remarkable, really. And I'm very proud of this book, and I'm very proud of Stefan. And I'm really glad this session was recorded. And any of you who want to access this, Tony Adams will be putting out some emails about how to access the recordings, because I think this could be very valuable for other young writers and older writers as well. So thank you very much for a really stimulating session.
Thank you, Art, for your kind words. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And so I guess with that being said, I would like to, Dr. Battle, thank you for this phenomenal work. So if you haven't got the text, it is a performative autoethnography of 5 Black American men. Also, thank you, Art. Hey, Carolyn. Hey, how you doing?
Hello.
Oh, Carolyn, hi.
I had
Yeah.
to be at the other session. I'm so sorry to miss this one.
Nice to see you,
That's
Carolyn. How are
Yeah.
you?
I'm good. I'm good. Nice to see you too, all of you.
Indeed.
And I heard Art came up and told me it was just a spectacular session.
Oh,
So
thank
I'm
you.
glad to hear that. And
Thank you.
No, thank you. So that, and I love the feel of the symposium, because it's not stuffy. I feel like it's communal in essence. And so thank you, Art and Carolyn and Tony and Keith, for what you have done to create this.
Yes, thank you all
merging
very
of minds.
much.
Yeah. And thank you everyone who made a comment. Thank you all for the comments that you shared either in the chat or you shared out loud. Yes, this has been really, really, really good. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
As my mother would say, my cup is full and runneth over. So thank you for that. All right.
Thank you all
Dr.
very
Battle.
much.
Thank you, Dr. Battle. Can't wait to see what's next.
I'm working on it. Take care.
Thank you, Marquese.
All right,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
yeah.
Always.